This is the tale of two Vikings. However, neither one of them is alike. Set in AD 865 Scandinavia would where we be heading tonight, for on this year these two Vikings would have a great battle ahead, a battle that will go down in Viking history but will leave several all dead. Before we get to this great battle, however, we need to go back to the start, where characters are introduced, scenes are set, and a certain main character called Eric is met. Eric was a poor Viking farmer's son who was only just 17. He worked on his father's farm as a craftsman and was so very lean. Sword after sword Eric would make without a stop or a break. He just didn't have time to sit down, no matter how much his body did ache. You see, not only did poor Eric work as a craftsman, but he had chores to do as well, such as harvesting the crops in his father's fields, by hand, of course, I tell. Eric found carrots to be the hardest vegetable to pull out of the ground. They were stubborn and well-rooted, and would make poor Eric fall to the ground. Life for Eric was hard, and he wasn't very brave. He couldn't even fight off his pet chicken, who they named Dave. How was he ever going to cope with the battle that was in a mere few days? Now our second Viking character in this tale has a lifestyle fit for a king. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and an enormous study which his paintings hanged in. Ivar is his name, and he was very rich and famous, with hair as golden as the sun, and muscles that would stun. It is such a shame that he was so very vain, and only 5'1". However, unlike Eric, Ivar was brave, but maybe a little too brave at that, for he enjoyed fighting and would practice all day long on his sword-bearing attacks. He was prepared for this battle, wasn't fazed, he couldn't wait. Let's hope his over-eagerness doesn't land him in a rectangular crate. Now the plan was simple. They would take a long ship to sea and sail to a place called England, where the Anglo-Saxons would be. The Saxons were enemies, so the aim was key. They would kill them all and steal their land and settlements with glee, whilst renaming their towns like York and Selby. To prepare for this great battle, Eric began making his sword and his helmet. He took out some iron, some steel, and began to weld it. Banging and crashing and grinding and smashing, Eric worked through the day and night, moulding his sword that when finished he would use to fight. Ivar's way of preparing for the battle ahead was very relaxed and calm. He wasn't building a sword from scratch like Eric in his farm. No, Ivar had money, so he hired people to help instead. A craftsman for his weapons, and a tailor who would measure him from his toes to his head. The day of the battle, Eric had finally finished his sword. It was plain but sturdy, which mattered most of all. Ivar's tailor placed his helmet on top of his head. He looked proud and ready during this moment, whilst Eric felt a dread. Eric put on his own helmet, as he didn't have a tailor to dress him. His helmet was plain, just like his sword, and kept on falling over his eyes whenever he walked. The final pieces of Ivar's armour were being placed. He wore a helmet made from the hardest of steel, a chest plate that wouldn't disintegrate, and the finishing touch, a ruby red cape made from the purest silk which softly did drape. Eric, on the other hand, couldn't afford such luxury, so he wore his old brown baggy trousers with a belt to clinch his waist, and a long green coat which was laced with little brown buttons that graced. All that was left to complete Ivar's suit of armour was his father's sword, handcrafted by a farmer. It was recognised through its detailed handle and blue gemstones. It was one of a kind, without a clone, passed down through generations, and finally was Ivar's to own. The battle day was here. But who was more prepared? Ivar, with his finest suit, his father's sword, or poor Eric, in his baggy old clothing that he could only just afford, and a plain iron sword that will hopefully ward? The bow set sail across the sea, bound for England, where the Anglo-Saxons would be. Ivar stood ready at the head of the ship when they were getting ready to port. Meanwhile, Eric was sat in a corner, all tiny and distraught. He wasn't ready to fight. He was only a poor farmer, and wished so badly that he could go back to the arms of his mother and father. The ship had docked, and the moment had arrived. It was time for Eric and Ivar to begin their fight to survive. Ivar got stuck in, killing one Saxon to the next. With a quick flick of his sword, they would all suddenly drop dead. There was dust everywhere and bombs that would explode. But Ivar kept fighting on. He was in killing mode. Poor Eric, on the other hand, was crumbling with fear. All this death and destruction was too much for him to adhere. He wanted to escape, so he started to run, until he came to a small hut where a little boy, only one, was being trapped by a man, alone with no one. As Eric watched on, he felt a powerful surge. He didn't take flight, but actually wanted to fight. As he saw the child was helpless, he charged at the man with his sword in his hand, and he felt a rage that span across his head as he shouted, "I can!" His body grew hotter as he was nearing to slaughter. He pointed his sword, and suddenly it went colder. He slowly opened his eyes, and to his surprise laid the man, who was dead on the floor. Eric had saved the young boy, whose name was Roy, and he turned to Eric and grinned. Eric was no longer a coward, and felt more empowered. He was a warrior and a proud Viking. The great battle continued for several years, until it finished in AD 878. Few had survived to tell the tale, whilst others had sealed their fate. All that was left of them was passed down and collected, and leaving those who knew them sad and neglected.